What is going on, Coaching Collective students? Welcome back to coaching call number 6. Today, we're going to deep dive protein, what it is, what it isn't, why it's beneficial, ranges to put it at, everything in between, couple cool tidbits on it. Like I explained to everybody who's here before the recording, we're going to touch immediately on like some really in-depth, like more in depth than you will ever need to know about the protein breakdown and polymers and monomers, all this other crap. I don't even know what they mean, but it's important to touch on a couple of them because I'm going to use them for practical comparisons later in the presentation. Regardless, let's go ahead and dive in. Let me share my screen and we will start this presentation. Cool. Here we go. Protein, the good, the bad, the ugly, the delicious. Also, just so we know, I don't think that this call is going to take us a crazy amount of time. I think we'll be done in less than an hour. You guys can go about your day. We'll obviously do Q&As at the end and stuff and go from there. But let's dive in. What really is protein and why do we prioritize it? So I'll be honest, the first like 2 or 3 bullets, or the first 2 bullets, or the first bullet, you do not need to write down at all. I kind of did it as a joke, because it's like so in depth, it's like ridiculous. So protein structure is the 3-dimensional arrangement of atoms in an amino acid chain molecule. Okay, proteins are polymers, specifically polypeptides, which that one's kind of important, polypeptides. They're formed from sequences of amino acids. The monomers of the polymer, a single amino acid monomer, may also be called a residual indicating a residue indicating a repeating unit of a polymer. Give me 1 second. Apparently my dogs are killing themselves. Just go ahead, just read it for a sec. What is going on over here? I'm trying to do a presentation. All right. Well, there was that. So moving on. Okay, this one is important, and this is one I want you guys to write down because this is what I was talking about. This is what we will use later in the presentation for practicality purposes. There are 7 types of proteins. Important. Okay, what are they? Antibodies, contractile proteins, enzymes, hormonal proteins, structural proteins, storage proteins, and transport proteins. This is really, really important for us to grasp here, okay? We will revisit this later. I'll give you guys a second to write it down. I mean, the call is recorded, but you can write it down while I go over the rest. The rest is pretty straightforward. We all know this. Protein is a macronutrient that is essential for building muscle mass. I know, quite a shocker. Proteins are large, complex molecules, and they play protein is so critical for so many roles in the body. That's why we're touching on it today. They do most of the work inside cells. They're required for the structure, function, and regulation of the body's tissues and organs. And these proteins provide structure and support for all of our cells. So down to the cellular level of support, protein is crucial for us. Protein helps present muscle protein breakdown. It also helps induce muscle protein synthesis, which is what we need to build muscle. Now, does anybody know which one of the amino acids or the essential amino acids specifically we need to spike muscle protein synthesis?
Wait, is that a question?
What?
Are you asking that as a question?
I was. Yeah, I was. It's all right. I answered it though. Don't worry.
Oh.
We're good. Moving on. Protein aids in recovery. It helps increase muscle strength. And it does have the highest thermic effect of food, which means we burn the most amount of calories that we eat from protein as compared to fats and carbs. Eating more protein, you're going to burn more calories from that protein ingested overall. Any questions on this slide? Pretty much the intro. Cool. Let's move on. Let's dive even deeper. #science. Nitrogen is a fundamental component of amino acids. If you are one of my athletes, you have probably heard me refer to nitrogen retention a substantial amount of times when we're in a dieting phase. So anyways, a fundamental component of amino acids, which are the molecule building blocks of protein. This over here is a protein structure model, right? You can see carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, everything in between. Okay, so measuring nitrogen inputs and losses can be used to study protein metabolism. Positive nitrogen balance is associated with periods of growth, tissue repair, pregnancy, hypothyroidism. So if we have a positive nitrogen balance and nitrogen is a component of protein, what would that mean for the diet? And a positive balance, what is it? What are we in our diet? We're growing. What are we in?
Surplus.
Surplus. Yes, correct. Well, that's what makes sense, right? That's what makes the most amount of sense. So when you eat protein, your body breaks the protein down into amino acids. Those amino acids are then used to repair and grow new muscle fibers. When you consume an adequate amount of protein, your body will experience something called a positive balance of nitrogen. And when we do this, this is what I was talking about of nitrogen retention. When we're in a dieting phase, right, if protein is comprised of nitrogen, we want to make sure that we are getting in enough protein or more than enough protein so that all that nitrogen retention is there and we stay in that positive balance of nitrogen. The balance between protein breakdown and buildup, we can use this as muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis. It's referred to as protein turnover, right? So it's a turnover rate, just like anything. When proteins are broken down, their nitrogen-containing amino acids become part of the amino acid pool, which is a reserve of available amino acids stored in your body tissues for future use. So basically, if you're having additional nitrogen coming in from protein, your body is kind of doing it as a pool of reserve for future use. Does that everybody kind of grasp that concept? Cool. All right, let's move on. So how much protein should we consume? We'll get to the second part in a second, okay? Or actually, well, yeah, we'll come back to it. So I'm going to use Dr. Bill Campbell as a reference here because this dude is like leading the industry in studies around protein. Audrey in here is actually in his master's program, so I get to hear a lot of cool stuff from her all the time, which is really cool. But I'm going to reference one specifically. So Bill Campbell has shown and kind of said how 1.8 grams per pound of, or per kilogram is his standard spot for dieting with protein. Now, I can agree to disagree with this man all day long, or I can, whatever, but he is literally leading the industry in the studies of protein. So probably a good guy to listen to. One study that I'm going to reference specifically, and if you guys look down in parentheses here, the ATP Project episode 215, that's actually a podcast that he discussed this on. So if you guys want to go check that out as an additional resource, I definitely think it's worth the listen just for it to all click a little bit better. But he did this with women. So here's the thing is we can assume that any study done in women to show positives of protein, we can see even more positives in men because men are going to have higher levels of testosterone. Let me see if they stop. All right, we're good. So men have a higher level of testosterone, and testosterone aids in the synthesization of protein or the synthesizing of protein. I don't think synthesization is a word. So high levels of testosterone, high levels of muscle protein synthesis, we're able to get more bang for our buck with more protein. Does that make sense to everybody? Women have low testosterone, men have high testosterone. Cool. So this study was actually done in women, and he had a group of women eat upwards of 2.4 grams per kilogram of body weight, while that protein put them in a 300 calorie surplus, and they actually ended up losing body fat as a byproduct of having the higher protein. That's a pretty substantial study. And that's a big one why I prefer, and I've talked about this in other calls, I prefer protein to get up as high as we can with digestion still pending. Now there is, in my opinion, there is a bit of a buffer zone here where even though digestion is permitting for protein to be at a certain height, it can start to show some inflammation on the body. So I don't really worry about this too much unless I have somebody like dieting for competition prep and they're really close to show, then I'll pull protein down a little bit to just like ease things off the gastrointestinal tract. But other than that, it's not anything I'm too worried about. So anyways, moving on. So we can see we have benefits all across the board from simply just eating more protein. like a lot of protein. So going back up to this, so how much protein should we consume? The key word in that question is what? Based off individual variance. What is the most important part of that? What's the key word in that question? How much
Should.
protein should we?
Should.
No. We. It's we. Because the most important process, it is, okay, here's the thing. It was a play on words. I capitalized should. I wanted somebody to say should, so I could say, no, it's we. You fell into my trap. Obviously, should makes the most amount of sense, but it should be we, right? Because we can say this protein should be consumed based off of Dr. Campbell's study. It should be 2.4 grams per kilogram. But if I have an individual who can knock out 3 grams per kilogram and get even better results, then that's how much that person should be consuming. Do you guys kind of get what I'm saying there? Remember that everything is not, oh, I forgot to do my disclaimer. This is not Bible. I am not telling you this is the only way to do things. This is just simply my interpretation of the data. I'll tell you guys I'll really tell you guys what to do in the tax call after this. So what can your athlete's digestion handle optimally? Push this threshold. And what I mean by push this threshold is really try to find out how much protein can this person handle. That's going to be a sweet spot that has a multitude of benefits across the board. Just a quick breakdown, because this is an important one to note. Muscle protein synthesis is the metabolic process that describes the incorporation of amino acids into bound skeletal muscle proteins. So again, if you're one of my athletes and you hear me say, we need to focus on nitrogen retention from a musculoskeletal standpoint, we're trying to keep muscle protein synthesis or a positive nitrogen balance. You see how it kind of all is saying the same thing, just different words. It's all the same thing here for the most part. So muscle proteins can be crudely classified into the contractile myofibril proteins, myosin, actin, tropomyosin, troponin, and the energy producing mitochondria.